Ladies and gentlemen, with the ranked mode out right now, you might be a little bit hesitant to jump right into ranked if you're not that confident in your aim or mechanical skill. Now, mechanical skill plays a huge role in Valorant, but there are still tons of ways that you can have insane impact without any mechanical skill. So let's break down the easy way to climb in ranked even when you can't aim. Speaking of aim, your crit rate will jump a whopping 10% if you smash that sub button. So do yourself a big favor and smash it right now. But enough talking, let's just jump right into it, shall we? Now, a core topic of this video, and perhaps the most important thing that you could do if you want to still win games, even if you're not so confident in your mechanical skill or your aim, that would be play with a team. You see, Valorant is a team game at heart, and playing your role in a team matters almost just as much as being able to hit shots by yourself. Now, in order to do this, let's break down some sections that will help you specifically start to have impact in your game. The first thing that you need to do is fill a role. With poor mechanics, you basically just want to do your job on a team. Now, you might be asking, what is your job? Well, that depends. There are all sorts of different jobs, like holding a site and relaying information, stalling a site, putting damage on the enemy team with utility, zoning enemies away. It all depends on what your hero is or your agent that you pick. Now, another big tip that you should definitely incorporate is pick an agent that has very powerful utility. Instead of a character that relies more on enabling your raw gunplay, someone like Reyna, Jet, or anyone like that, a character that instead brings tons of value with their utility is definitely your bread and butter if your bread and butter isn't clicking heads. There are tons of characters in this category, but some of the best ones are some of the best characters in the game, with those three characters being Sage, Brimstone, and Cypher. Each of these three characters have very powerful utility, and they can bring so much to the team, be insanely impactful with game sense and utility-based plays, and they don't even really need to hit that insane of shots. So these are three that I would highly suggest. Essentially, what you want to do is you want to play into the side of Valorant that relies on utility, and you want to use your abilities far smarter than the enemy, as opposed to just try to take 50-50 gunfights every time, trying to rely on the fact that you aim better than everyone. Now, what is the next thing that you could do as far as utility is concerned to get more value than the enemy? Well, something that a lot of players don't do that you should 100% do is combo your abilities. There are so many abilities that combo. Razor's paint shells and Cypher's trapwire, it's a pretty obvious one, but one of the ones that the developers used was just setting a trapwire out of hookah and then throwing paint shells through the teleporter when the trap was triggered. This is a simple combo. Setting up Sova recon arrows around a corner followed up with flashes. There is just so many different combos with slow orb, with paint shells. The list goes on and on and on. Now, I know that some of these combos might be a little bit difficult to just run through with anyone you find in ranked. For that reason alone, I would highly suggest that you find a duo partner to play Valorant with you. You and him can combo all your abilities together, try to play a synergistic duo, try to get more value with your abilities, set up these unfair advantages, and basically just use your abilities better than the enemy, because a combo of abilities can get exponentially more value than just abilities alone. For example, sending in a slow orb that prevents enemies from running in, and then sending in paint shells to punish them for standing still. That could be the 2-for-1 special that actually confirms you kills, as opposed to just letting them run completely out of it. That's a way that you're really working smarter, not harder. Now, the next thing that you 100% need, if you're not that confident in your aim, is you need great comms. Here's the biggest problem that a lot of people have when they comm. They tell people what to do while they're playing the game. This is known as backseat gaming, but it is very, very problematic when someone is trying to focus on their own mechanical skill, their own plays, the in-game sound, and you have someone in comms saying, hey, there's someone here, hey, there's someone above, hey, there's someone in heaven, hey, there's here. All these comms like, hey, don't forget to do this, hey, don't forget to do this. There's just so much overload of information that it's just impossible for them to think. You should only be making these giant macro strategies or general things where you talk about eco, talk about strats, talk about things like that when you're not actively in a round, when you're not running around and shooting, when you could talk about it in pre-round, in the buying stages, of course, and before the match, but do not talk about it when someone's trying to clutch up a 1v1. Do not talk about strats or anything like that. It is completely useless information. Now, what you should relay 100% of the time is valuable information that your teammates either don't know or aren't thinking about. For example, you could say how much damage you marked on the last target, how much damage you put on them. That is extremely valuable information, but even stuff like telling an ally replied that he only has 7 bullets in his chamber. That might be something that he hasn't realized, and it's good information to tell him so that he knows. But besides just telling him that information, that is all you have to do. No commanding strategy or anything like that. Just relay good information, have solid comms, and you will win a lot more games just with that. And especially if you keep the morale up on your team, that of course is going to be fantastic for upping your win rate. Now, the next thing that you need to do is eco at the right times. You need to make sure that you're always on point with your eco. Make sure that you stress your team exactly when you should buy and sell. A lot of times players will just listen to you. If you just say, hey, we should buy this round, hey, we should sell this round, hey, maybe we should save this round. You could even just use the buttons. You don't even have to talk. But trying to get people to eco as a team is going to exponentially win you a lot of games. Now, I know this isn't really that relevant for players in the higher ranks, but it is important if you're in the lower ranks in particular to try to navigate people to do the right thing in games, especially if some players that are just entering this game that have insane aim and they're in your rank, but they don't know that much about the game. You definitely should at least relay that sort of information about eco. Now, another thing is, especially if you're not that confident in your mechanical skill, don't be a hero. If you have like an op or a vandal and it's like 1v3, you know, often in unranked mode, players would just go in and try to clutch up the point 1v3. But a lot of times, the realistic decision is just to save. Especially if you get to save that gun, put it in the bag, and then potentially buy an even better gun like an operator or a vandal for one of your teammates that can't afford it. That can mean the difference between winning a round and losing a round later on. Plus, you don't give up things like ops and vandals or anything like that to the enemy team. So definitely keep that in mind. I would highly suggest don't be a hero. Now, something that's really underrated, especially if you're playing a utility-based hero, is buying a gun and trading it with your teammates. For example, you're a Sage, you already have all your abilities, and you have a Vandal that you either had from last round or you had enough money for it. Now, you have a Reyna who is doing pretty well, but she bought something expensive like an Op and then lost or died, and now she doesn't have enough money for any gun, except for maybe a Spectre. Now, it makes a lot more sense for her to have the Vandal and for you to have the Spectre. Even though you want the Vandal and it just is really powerful, it's a great gun, you don't need that when your kit is centered around utility, and especially so you're not that confident in your gunplay anyway. You don't necessarily want to be taking these 1v1 duels when Reyna 100% needs to be taking these 1v1 duels. So you might as well trade guns with them, and you can just basically play hopscotch, so every single player on your team has the gun that's most fitted to their role. This is a very underrated strat, and I've seen a lot of pro players actually do this in pistol round, where they actually stack up abilities on one player. Like they give a Reyna, they let her buy all of her abilities, her Leer and her Devour, and they get her a silenced pistol. So some person on the team just isn't buying a good gun or all their utility, but they're just hard stacking it on the Reyna, because Reyna has the capacity to exponentially pop off in pistol round if you give her the best gun with the Ghost with all of her utility. So someone else just buys her a Ghost and gives it to her, and that's insanely powerful, and I think it's a really underrated strat. Definitely something you could do if you're not that confident in your gunplay. Now, the next big thing that you have to do is take advantaged fights. This is such a core concept to Valorant, but it is extremely important, especially if you're not that confident in your own ability. Never take even fights if you can help it. Play smarter, not harder. That's a term that I've repeated throughout this video, but you can almost always secure a kill, and at the very least secure a trade if you take a fight 2v1. Oftentimes, if you swing 2v1 against an enemy, you will usually just kill them without them being able to get any kill at all. This is an example of taking advantage fights. You do not have to take even fights if you don't want to. On top of this, just the whole nature of utility can set up unfair fights, like hitting a whole bunch of enemies with paint shells, for example. That can be a way that you put damage on them, and then you have to hit less shots on them to do the same result and win the matchup. Or maybe the enemy is completely flashed and you clear out every single corner with utility. You're playing someone like Breach, for example, and killing an enemy when they're flashed is 100% unfair. And this is what I mean. Instead of taking these 50-50 gunfights, just straight up raw mechanical skill versus raw mechanical skill, you never have to take these fights. And good players, even good players with mechanical skill, will often use their utility in order to make unfair advantages. But especially if you're not confident with your mechanical skill, you can still get tons of value on these high utility based heroes if you make sure that you always take advantage fights. You make sure you have good comps, combo abilities, fill a role, and do all these things in this video. Now, the next thing that we have to talk about, and this might be the most important, is play for the win condition. Always play for the time and keep the clock in mind. Use the time on the clock as a resource. Playing in default, baiting out utility, making it so that the enemy has pressure on them these are all using time as a resource either against your enemy or using the clock that you have to bait out utility. You got to think about time being a very valuable resource because you have a giant time pool, but a lot of players will just use their time really frivolously. Like they'll go and they'll plant the spike with so much time in the bank when they could have really used that time to further bait out utility, further gather information, further wait for the enemy to make a mistake. There's just so much that you can do with that time. There isn't necessarily a giant rush to just bait out the first wave of utility and then rush straight onto point and plant. That is not always the best strat. In fact, it's usually not. It's often better to use the time bank to its full potential and try to get as much value as possible in default. Now, when I talk about putting pressure on the enemy, doing things like planting the spike in general or even baiting enemies with planting the spike, these are ways that you can put extra pressure on the enemy because when you have a lot of time, your actions can be really well thought out and fluid. You can check every corner, every crevice, but when time is low, especially when time is ticking down extremely rapidly, all of a sudden your movements are far looser. You can't check every corner. You have to rush onto point to try to defuse, hope to get the kill, and you can use that to your advantage. So that's something that's really important. Make sure that you understand how pressure and time plays a huge role in your games, and think about it from a macro perspective because game sense is what you're truly relying on in order to win these games, especially when your mechanical skill is lacking overall. Of course, I would highly suggest that you start to grind your mechanics. I know that mechanics isn't something that you're going to learn overnight, and you don't want to suck at Valorant the entire time you're playing while you're building mechanical skill, but keep in mind that there's only so far that you can go in this game without great mechanical skill, so you do need to be putting time and effort every single day in order to upping your mechanical skill. I just released a mechanical guide, so definitely go check that out. Now, the last thing that we have to talk about is using your ultimate to win games. You see, abilities are very powerful, and that's the axis that you often want to fight on in Valorant when you can't aim very well. And ultimates are definitely extremely powerful too, and some ultimates can win entire games by themselves. Orbital Strike, Res, Hunter's Fury, there's a lot of abilities that can just get you raw value on the table. Don't forget to put in time and effort, especially if you have a powerful ultimate, to try to secure orbs. Tell a teammate, hey, I'll cover you while you grab the orb, or say, hey, can you cover me while I grab these orbs? At the very least, if you can secure multiple orbs throughout a round, you can turn your ultimate into tangible value. As an additional tip to this, make sure that you're always relaying to your team what ultimates the enemies have, and do your best, especially if you're not in the forefront of the fight, to really monitor what players on the enemy team are getting kills, because you can cross-reference that with how close they were to their ultimate in the pre-round screen, so you know that, hey, Sage got 2 kills here, she most likely has ultimate, I can change my playstyle around that, and you can relay it to your teammates, so definitely keep that in mind. Like I said, you're trying to win off of your game sense, so you need to be extra diligent to pay attention to all these little things that your average player might not even care about. The last thing is make sure that you try to get the most value out of every single ultimate and secure close rounds so that you know that they will be wins on the table. Sometimes using an ult at the correct time can turn a close round into a round that you actually won, which could add up over time. And we're talking about your overall impact in the game, even if you can't aim that well, and ultimates are a route to getting that impact. So you can't afford to waste your ultimate. So every single round that you win using ultimates is a round that you successfully carried, even without being able to click heads. Anyways, I know that you can't click heads if you finish this entire video, but I definitely need you to click that subscribe button, and welcome aboard to GameLeap. Good luck with all your ranked adventures, and make sure that you keep checking back for all the new updated guides and advanced tips and concepts that are soon to be on this channel. Anyways, if you have any suggestions for ideas, definitely let me know in the comments down below. I know a lot of you want advanced guides, but the fact of the matter is the majority of players are not so advanced as you players that have been playing Counter-Strike since the beginning or have been playing the beta since it came out. I promise you that some of the future guides coming up are going to be far more advanced than what we've been covering so far, so definitely keep that in mind. Anyways, that's all we got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time,